Section 24 of the Endeavour Journal of Sir Joseph Banks. Journal from 24 August 1768 to 12 July 1771 by Joseph Banks. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Gail Timmerman Vaughan. Section 24, October 1769, Part 1. 1769, October 1. Very little wind, and yet vast quantities of small birds, or about the ship, a very uncommon sight in such fine weather. A seal seen from the ship. Several pieces of seaweed are taken, and among them a piece of wood quite overgrown with sertularias. It must have been a long time at sea, yet more hopes are drawn from this than the seaweed, as we now have in our possession a part of the produce of our land of promise. Among the weed are many sea insects, which are put into spirits, weed, wood, and all, so we shall at least have this to show. Several whales have been seen today. 1769, October 2. Calm. I go in the boat and take up Digessa prostrata, Serena, Polyedra, Baroe incrustata, Coarctata, Medusa vitrea, Phyllodoce velella, with several other things, which are all put in spirits. See a seal, but cannot come near him to shoot. Shoot Diomedea excellens, Procellaria velox, Polypes, Laterostris, Longipes, and Nectris fuliginosa. 1769, October 3. Calm almost this morn. About 5 a squall came on with such violence that the officer of the watch was obliged to settle the topsails. It did not, however, last above 5 minutes. This we look upon as a sure sign of land, as such squalls are rarely, if ever, met with at any considerable distance from it. I go in the boat and kill Procellaria capensis, Longipes, and Laterostris. In the course of the day several pieces of seaweed are taken up, of species very new, and one piece of wood covered with striated barnacles, Lepus anicerina ? Now I do wish that our friends in England could, by the assistance of some magical spying glass, take a peep at our situation. Dr. Solander sits at the cabin table describing, myself at my bureau journalizing. Between us hangs a large bunch of seaweed, upon the table lays the wood and barnacles. They would see that notwithstanding our different occupations, our lips move very often, and without being conjurers might guess that we are talking about what we should see upon the land, which there is now no doubt we shall see very soon. 1769, October 4. Several pieces of seaweed are taken today, but no heaps. Weather pleasant. Breeze rather of the gentlest. Toward evening we were entertained by a large shoal of porpoises, like those of the 30th of last month. They came up to the ship in prodigious circling action, leaping out of the water, sometimes 2 or 3 feet high, as nimbly as bonitos. Immediately after them came a number of a larger sort, quite black, who moved very heavy in the water. Both these troops kept their course by the ship, without taking much notice of her, probably in pursuit of some prey. 1769, October 5th. Our old enemy, Cape Flyaway, entertained us for 3 hours this morn, all which time there were many opinions in the ship. Some said it was land and others clouds, which at last, however, plainly appeared. 2 seals passed the ship asleep, and 3 of the birds which Mr. Gore calls Port Egmont hens, Larus cataractes, and says are a sure sign of land being near. They are something larger than a crow, in flight much like one, flapping their wings often with a slow motion. Their bodies and wings of a dark chocolate or soot colour, under each wing a small broadish bar of dirty white, which makes them so remarkable that it is hardly possible to mistake them. They are seen, as he says, all along the coast of America and in Falkland Isles. I myself remember to have seen them at Terra del Fuego, but by some accident did not note them down. Just before sunset we were much entertained by a shoal of porpoises, like those seen yesterday. They kept in sight of the ship for near an hour, all that while as if in hot pursuit of some prey, leaping out of the water almost over each other. They might be very justly compared to a pack of hounds in full cry, only their numbers, which were some thousands, made them a much more considerable object. Sometimes they formed a line near 1/4 of a mile in length, sometimes contracted themselves into a much smaller compass, keeping the water wherever they were in a foam, so that when they were so far from the ship that their bodies could not be distinguished, any man would have taken them for breakers. 1769, October 6. This morn a Port Egmont hen and a seal were seen pretty early. At 1:30 a small boy, who was at the masthead, called out, "Land!" I was luckily upon deck, and well I was entertained. Within a few minutes the cry circulated, and up came all hands. This land could not then be seen, even from the tops, yet few were there who did not plainly see it from the deck, till it appeared that they had looked at least 5 points wrong. Weather most moderate. We came up with it very slowly. At sunset myself was at the masthead. Land appeared very much like an island or islands, but seemed to be very large. Just before a small shark was seen, who had a very piked nose, something like our dogfish in England. 1769, October 7. This morn the land, plainly seen from the deck, appears to be very large. About 11 a large smoke was seen, and soon after several more, sure sign of inhabitants. After dinner dropped calm. Myself in little boat shot Nectris munda and Procellaria velox. Took with a dipping net Dagus gemma and a good deal of Fucus, Sertulina, etc., the examination of which is postponed till we shall have more time than we are likely to have at present. In the evening a pleasant breeze. At sunset all hands at the masthead. Land still distant 7 or 8 leagues appears larger than ever. In many parts 3, 4, and 5 ranges of hills are seen, one over the other, and a chain of mountains over all, some of which appear enormously high. Much difference of opinion and many conjectures about islands, rivers, inlets, etc., but all hands seem to agree that this is certainly the continent we are in search of. 1769, October 8. Arrived New Zealand. This morn the land, very near us, makes in many white cliffs, like chalk. The hills are in general clothed with trees. In the valleys some appear to be very large. The whole of the appearance not so fruitful as we could wish. Stood in for a large bay in hopes of finding a harbour. Before we are well within the heads, saw several canoes standing across the bay, who after a little time returned to the place they had come from, not appearing to take the least notice of us. Some houses were also seen which appeared low but neat. Near one a good many people were collected, who sat down on the beach seemingly observing us. Possibly the same as we saw in the canoes as they landed somewhere near that place. On a small peninsula at the northeast head we could plainly see a regular paling, pretty high, enclosing the top of a hill, for which purpose many conjectures were made. Most are of opinion, or say at least, that it must be or shall be either a park of deer or a field of oxen and sheep. By 4 o'clock came to an anchor near 2 miles from the shore. The bay appears to be quite open, without the least shelter. The 2 sides of it make in high white cliffs. The middle is low land, with hills gradually rising behind one another to the chain of high mountains inland. Here we saw many great smokes, some near the beach, others between the hills, some very far within land, which we looked upon as great indications of a populous country. In the evening went ashore with the marines, etc. Marched from the boats in hopes of finding water, etc. Saw a few of the natives who ran away immediately on seeing us. While we were absent, 4 of them attacked our small boat, in which were only 4 boys. They got off from the shore in a river. The people followed them and threatened with long lances. The pinnace soon came to their assistance, fired upon them, and killed the chief. The other 3 dragged the body about 100 yards and left it. At the report of the muskets we drew together and went to the place where the body was left. He was shot through the heart. He was a middle-sized man, tattooed in the face, on one cheek only, in spiral lines very regularly formed. He was covered with a fine cloth of a manufacture totally new to us. It was tied on exactly as represented in Mr. Dalrymple's book, page 63. His hair was also tied in a knot on the top of his head, but no feathers stuck in it. His complexion brown, but not very dark. Soon after we came on board, we heard the people ashore very distinctly, talking very loud, no doubt, as they were not less than 2 miles distant from us, consulting probably what is to be done tomorrow. 1769, October 9. We could see with our glasses, but few people on the beach. They walked with a quick pace toward the river, where we landed yesterday, most of these without arms, 3 or 4 with long pikes in their hands. The captain ordered 3 boats to be manned with seamen and marines, intending to land and try to establish a communication with them. A high surf ran on the shore. The Indians, about 50, remained on the farther side of the river. We looked upon that as a sign of fear, so landing with a little boat, only the captain, Dr. Solander, Tupaya, and myself, went to the riverside to speak to them. As soon almost as we appeared, they rose up, and every man produced either a long pike or a small weapon of well-polished stone about a foot long and thick enough to weigh 4 or 5 pounds. With these they threatened us, and signed us to depart. A musket was then fired wide of them, the ball of which struck the water. They saw the effect and immediately ceased their threats. We thought that it was prudent to retreat till the marines were landed, and drawn up to intimidate them and support us in case of necessity. They landed and marched with a jack carried before them to a little bank about 50 yards from the river, which might be about 40 broad. Here they were drawn up in order, and we again advanced to the riverside with Tupaya, who now found that the language of the people was so like his own, that he could tolerably well understand them, and they him. He immediately began to tell them that we wanted provisions and water, for which we would give them iron in exchange. They agreed to the proposal, but would by no means lay down their arms, which he desired them to do. This he looked upon as a sign of treachery, and continually told us to be upon our guard, for they were not our friends. Many words passed, the chief purport of which was that each side desired the other to come over to them. At last, however, an Indian stripped himself and swam over without arms. He was followed by 2 more, and soon after by most of the rest, who brought with them their arms. We gave them iron and beads, which they seemed to set little value upon, but especially upon the iron, the use of which they certainly were totally ignorant of. They caught at whatever was offered them, but would part with nothing but a few feathers. Their arms indeed they offered to exchange for ours, which they made several attempts to snatch from us. We were upon guard so much that their attempts failed, and they were made to understand that we must kill them if they snatched anything from us. After some time, Mr. Green, in turning himself about, exposed his hanger. One of them immediately snatched it, set up a cry of exultation, and waving it round his head, retreated gently. It now appeared necessary for our safeties that so daring an act should be instantly punished. This I pronounced aloud as my opinion. The captain and the rest joined me, on which I fired my musket, which was loaded with small shot, levelling it between his shoulders, who was not 15 yards from me. On the shot striking him, he ceased his cry, but instead of quitting his prize, continued to wave it over his head, retreating as gently as before. The surgeon, who was nearer him, seeing this, fired a ball at him, at which he dropped. 2 more, who were near him, returned instantly. One seized his weapon of green talk. The other attempted to recover the hanger, which the surgeon had scarce time to prevent. The main body of them were now upon a rock, a little way in the river. They took the water, returning toward us, on which the other 3, for we were only 5 in number, fired on them. They then retired and swam again across the river. On their landing, we saw that 3 were wounded. One seemed a good deal hurt. We may hope, however, that neither of them were killed, as one of the muskets only was loaded with ball, which I think I saw strike the water without taking effect, and Tupaya's gun, which was the last that was fired, I clearly saw strike 2 men low down upon the legs, who probably would be so lame as to walk with difficulty when they landed. The Indians retired gently, carrying with them their wounded, and we re-embarked in our boats, intending to row round the bay, see if there might be any shelter for the ship on the other side, and attempt to land there, where the country appeared to be more fruitful than where we were now. The bottom of the bay proved to be a low sandy beach, on which the sea broke most prodigiously, so that we could not come near it. Within was flat. A long way inland over this water might be seen from the masthead, probably a lagoon, but in the boat we could see no entrance into it. We had almost arrived at the farthest part of the bay, when a fresh breeze came in from the seaward, and we saw a canoe sailing in standing right toward us, soon after another paddling. The captain now resolved to take one of these, which in all probability might be done without the least resistance, as we had 3 boats full of men, and the canoes seemed to be fishermen, who probably were without arms. The boats were drawn up in such a manner that they could not well escape us. The paddling canoe first saw us, and made immediately for the nearest land. The other sailed on till she was in the midst of us, before she saw us. As soon as she did, she struck her sail and began to paddle so briskly that she outran our boat. On a musket being fired over her, she, however, immediately ceased paddling, and the people in her, 7 in all, made all possible haste to strip, as we thought to leap into the water. But no sooner did our boat come up with her than they began with stones, paddles, etc., to make so brisk a resistance that we were obliged to fire into her, by which 4 were killed. The other 3, who were boys, leapt overboard. One of them, swam with great agility, and when taken, made every effort in his power to prevent being taken into the boat. The other 2 were more easily prevailed upon. As soon as they were in, they squatted down, expecting no doubt instant death. But on finding themselves well used, and that clothes were given them, they recovered their spirits in a very short time, and before we got to the ship appeared almost totally insensible of the loss of their fellows. As soon as they came on board, we offered them bread to eat, of which they almost devoured a large quantity. In the meantime they had clothes given to them. This good usage had such an effect that they seemed to have entirely forgot everything that had happened, put on cheerful and lively countenances, and asked and answered questions with a great deal of curiosity. Our dinner came. They expressed a curiosity to taste whatever they saw us eat, and did. Salt pork seemed to please them better than anything else. Of this they eat a good deal. At sunset they eat again an enormous quantity of bread, and drank above a quart of water each. We then made them beds upon the lockers, and they laid down to sleep, with all seeming content imaginable. After dark, loud voices were heard ashore, as last night. Thus ended the most disagreeable day my life has ever seen. Black be the mark for it, and heaven send that such may never return to embitter future reflection. I forgot to mention in its proper place that we picked up a large pumice stone floating in the bay in returning to the ship today, a sure sign that there either is or has been a volcano in this neighborhood. 1769 October 10. In the middle of last night one of our boys seemed to show more reflection than he had before done, sighing often and loud. Tupaya, who was always upon the watch to comfort them, got up and soon made them easy. They then sung a song of their own. It was not without some taste, like a psalm tune, and contained many notes and semitones. They sung it in parts, which gave us no indifferent idea of their taste, as well as skill in music. The oldest of them is about 18, the middlemost 15, and the youngest 10. The middlemost especially has a most open countenance and agreeable manner. Their names are Ta'ahorangi, Koikarangi, and Maragoete, the first 2 brothers. In the morning they are all very cheerful, and eat an enormous quantity. After that they were dressed and ornamented with bracelets, anklets, and necklaces, after their own fashion. The boats were then hoisted out, and we all got into them. The boys expressed much joy at this, till they saw that we were going to land at our old landing place near the river. They begged very much that they might not be set ashore at that place, where they said were enemies of theirs who would kill and eat them. The captain resolved to go ashore at that place, and if the boys did not choose to go from us, in the evening to send a boat with them to the part of the bay to which they pointed and called their home. Accordingly we went ashore and crossed the river. The boys at first would not leave us. No method was used to persuade them. It was even resolved to return and carry them home, when on a sudden they seemed to resolve to go, and with tears in their eyes took leave. We then went along a swamp, intending to shoot some ducks, of which there was a great plenty. The country was quite flat. The sergeant and 4 marines attended us, walking upon a bank abreast of us, which overlooked the country. We proceeded about a mile when they called out that a large body of Indians was marching toward us. They drew together and resolved to retreat. Before we had put this in execution, the 3 boys rose out of a bush in which they were hid, and put themselves again under our protection. We went upon the beach as the clearest place, and walked briskly towards the boats. The Indians were in 2 parties. One marched along the bank, before spoke of. The other came round by the morass, where we could not see them. On seeing us drawn together, they ceased to run, as they had done, and walked but gently on, a circumstance most fortunate for us, for when we came to our boats the pinnace was a mile at least from her station, sent there by the officer ashore to pick up a bird he had shot. The small boat only remained, which was carried over the river, and without the midshipman who was left to attend her. The consequence of this was that we were obliged to make 3 trips before we were all over to the rest of the party. As soon as we were well drawn up on the other side, the Indians came down, not in a body as expected, but 2 and 3 at a time, all armed, and soon increased to a considerable number. We now despaired of making peace with men who were not to be frightened with our small arms. As the ship lay so far from the shore that she could not throw a shot there, we resolved to re-embark, as our stay would most likely be the cause of killing still more people. We were beginning to go towards the boats, when on a sudden one of the boys called out that the people were their friends, and desired us to stay and talk with them. We did, and much conversation passed, but neither would the boys swim over to them, nor they to the boys. The bodies both of the man who was killed yesterday and he who was killed the day before were left upon the beach. The first lay very near us. To it the boys went, and covered it with parts of the clothes we had given them. Soon after, a single man, unarmed, swam over to us, the uncle of Marakoiti, the younger boy. He brought in his hand a green bough, probably emblem of peace. We made him many presents, after having received his bough, which he presented to Tupaya, our interpreter. We asked him to go on board of the ship, but he refused, so we left him. But all the 3 boys chose rather to return with us than stay with him. As soon as we had retired and left him to himself, he went and gathered a green bough. With this in his hand, he approached the body with great ceremony, walking sideways. He then threw the bough toward it, and returned to his companions, who immediately sat down round him, and remained above an hour, hearing probably what he said, without taking the least notice of us, who soon returned to the ship. From thence we could see with our glasses 3 men cross the river in a kind of catamaran, and take away the body, which was carried off upon a pole by 4 men. After dinner the captain desired Tupaya to ask the boys if they had now any objection to going ashore at the same place, as taking away the body was probably a ratification of our peace. They said they had not, and went most nimbly into the boat in which 2 midshipmen were sent. They went ashore willingly, but soon returned to the rocks, wading into the water, and begging hard to be taken in again. The orders were positive to leave them, so they were left. We observed from the ship a man in a catamaran go over the river and fetch them to a place where 40 or 50 were assembled. They sat till near sunset without stirring. They rose then, and the 3 boys appeared, who had till now been concealed by being surrounded with people. They left the party, came down upon the beach, and 3 times waved their hands toward the ship, then nimbly ran and joined the party, who walked leisurely away toward the place where the boys live. We therefore hope that no harm will happen to them, especially as they still have the clothes which we gave them on. After sunset loud voices were heard as usual in the bottom of the bay. 1769 October 11. This morn we took our leave of Poverty Bay, with not above 40 species of plants in our boxes, which is not to be wondered at, as we were so little ashore, and always upon the same spot. The only time we wandered about a mile from the boats was upon a swamp, where not more than 3 species of plants were found. Weather this day was most moderate. Several canoes put off from shore and came towards us, within less than a quarter of a mile, but could not be persuaded to come nearer, though Tupaya exerted himself very much, shouting out and promising that they should not be hurt. At last one was seen coming from Poverty Bay or near it. She had only 4 people in her, one who I well remember to have seen at our first interview on the rock. These never stopped to look at anything, but came at once alongside of the ship, and with very little persuasion came on board. Their example was quickly followed by the rest. 7 canoes in all, and 50 men. They had many presents given to them, notwithstanding which they very quickly sold almost everything that they had within them, even their clothes from their backs, and the paddles out of their boats. Arms they had none except 2 men, one of whom sold his patu, as he called it, a short weapon of green talk, of this shape intended doubtless for fighting hand to hand, and certainly well contrived for splitting skulls, as it weighs not less than 4 or 5 pounds, and has sharp edges, excellently polished. We were very anxious to know what was become of our poor boys. Therefore, as soon as the people began to lose their first impressions of fear, that we saw at first disturbed them a good deal, we asked after them. The man who first came on board immediately answered that they were at home and unhurt, and that the reason of his coming on board the ship with so little fear was the account they had given him of the usage they had met with among us. The people were in general of a middling size, though there was one who measured more than 6 feet. Their colour dark brown. Their lips were stained with something put under the skin, as in the Tahiti tattoo, and their faces marked with deeply engraved furrows, coloured also black, and formed in regular spirals. Of these the oldest people had much the greatest quantity, and deepest channelled, in some not less than 1/16 part of an inch. Their hair, always black, was tied on the tops of their heads in a little knot, in which was stuck feathers of various birds in different tastes, according to the humour of the wearer, generally stuck into the knot, sometimes one on each side the temples, pointed forwards, which made a most disagreeable appearance. In their ears they generally wore a large bunch of the down of some bird, milk white. The faces of some were painted with a red colour in oil, some all over, others in parts only. In their hair was much oil that had very little smell, more lice than I ever saw before, and in most of them a small comb neatly enough made, sometimes of wood, sometimes of bone, which they seemed to prize much. Some few had on their faces or arms regular scars, as if made with a sharp instrument, such as I have seen on the faces of negroes. The inferior sort were clothed in something that very much resembled hemp. The loose strings of this were fastened together at the top, and hung down about 2 feet long like a petticoat. Of these garments they wore 2, one round their shoulders, the other about their waists. The richer had garments probably of a finer sort of the same stuff, most beautifully made, in exactly the same manner as the South American Indians at this day, as finer than one of them which I have by me, that I bought at Rio de Janeiro for 36 shillings, and was esteemed uncommonly cheap at that price. Their boats were not large but well made, something in the form of our whale boats but longer. Their bottom was the trunk of a tree hollowed and very thin. This was raised by a board on each side, sewed on, with a strip of wood sewed over the seam to make it tight. On the head of every one was carved the head of a man, with an enormous tongue reaching out of his mouth. These grotesque figures were, some at least, very well executed. Some had eyes inlaid of something that shone very much. The whole served to give us an idea of their taste, as well as ingenuity in execution, much superior to anything we have yet seen. Their behaviour while on board showed every sign of friendship. They invited us cordially to come back to our old bay, or to a small cove, which they showed us nearer to it. I could not help wishing that we had done so, but the captain chose rather to stand on in search of a better harbour than any we had yet seen. God send that we may not there have the same tragedy to act over again as we so lately perpetuated. The country is certainly divided into many small principalities, so we cannot hope that an account of our weapons and management of them can be conveyed as far as we in all probability must go. And this I am well convinced of, that till these warlike people have severely felt our superiority in the art of war, they will never behave to us in a friendly manner. About an hour before sunset the canoes left us, and with us 3 of their people, who were very desirous to have gone with them, but were not permitted to return to the canoes. What their reason for so doing is, we can only guess. Possibly they may think that their being on board will induce us to remain here till tomorrow, when they will return and renew the traffic by which they find themselves so great gainers. The people were tolerably cheerful, entertained us with dancing and singing after their custom, eat their suppers, and went to bed very quietly. 1769, October 12. During last night the ship sailed some leagues, which as soon as the 3 men saw, they began to lament and weep very much. Tupaia with difficulty could comfort them. About 7 2 canoes appeared. They left no sign unmade, which might induce them to come to the ship. One at last ventured. Out of her came an old man, who seemed to be a chief from the fineness of his garment and weapon, patu, which was made of bone, he said of a whale. He stayed but a short time on board, but when he went he took with him our 3 guests, much to our as well as their satisfaction. In sailing along shore we could clearly see several spots of land cultivated, some fresh turned up, and laying in furrows like ploughed land, others with plants growing upon them, some younger and some older. We also saw in 2 places high rails upon the ridges of hills, but could only guess that they belonged to some superstition, as they were in lines, not enclosing anything. Before noon another canoe appeared carrying 4 people. She came within about 1/4 of a mile of us, and there, I believe, performed several ceremonies. The man in the bow of her sometimes seeming to ask and offer peace, at others seeming to threaten with a weapon he held in his hand, sometimes dancing, sometimes singing. Tupaia talked much to him, but could not persuade him to come to the ship. About this time very distant land was seen to the southward, forming a very large bay. About dinner time the ship was hauling round an island called by the inhabitants Tiahoa, by us Portland. The ship on the sudden came into very broken ground, which alarmed us all a good deal. The officers all behaved with great steadiness, and in a very short time we were clear of all dangers. We never had less than 7 fathom, but the soundings hardly ever were twice the same, jumping from 11 to 7, which made us very glad once more to get deep water under us. The island lay within a mile of us, making in white cliffs, a long low spit of low land running from it towards the main. On the sides of these cliffs sat a vast quantity of people looking at us. These probably observed some confusion in the manoeuvre of the ship, for 5 canoes almost immediately put off from the shore, full of armed people. They came so near us, shouting and threatening, that at last we were in some pain lest they should seize our small boat, which had been lowered down to sound, and now towed alongside. A musket was therefore fired over them. The effect of this was rather to encourage them than otherwise, so a grape gun was ordered to be prepared, and fired wide of them, loaded with grape. On this they all rose in their boats, and shouted, but instead of continuing the chase, drew all together, and after a short consultation, went away quietly. About half an hour after this we hauled in with the land again, and 2 more canoes came off, one armed, the other a small fishing boat, with only 4 men in her. They came tolerably near, and answered all the questions Tupaya asked them very civilly. We could not persuade them to come on board, but they came near enough to receive several presents, which we hove overboard to them. With these they seemed very much pleased, and went away. At night the ship came to an anchor. Many fires were kept up on shore, possibly to show us that our friends there were too much upon their guard to be surprised. End of section 24, part 1 of October, 1769.